If you're like me, one of your dreams is to one day work on Broadway on that sweet, sweet production contract. And today, we're going to learn how to make this happen.
My name is Claudia Lynch, and this is your half-hour call. Good evening, everyone. This is your half-hour call. Half hour, please. This evening, you'll be speaking with Claudia Lynch about stage managing. Half hour.
Alrighty, friends, we are back with another episode of Half Hour Call. Today we're talking to my friend and mentor, Claudia Lynch. Claudia has been a stage manager for 27 years. 22 of those years were spent in New York, 18 of those as a Actors Equity Association stage manager, a capital A stage manager, as we like to say, and has worked on so many Broadway shows, some of which that you might recognize are Rock of Ages, the 2006 revival of Company, Light in the Piazza, and Little Shop of Horrors, and so many others. Claudia, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to get to talk to you about how to get from college to Broadway.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. It's my favorite subject.
Stick around till the end of the video because we're going to talk about the #1 avoidable mistake that Claudia sees young stage managers making in the market today. But first, let's talk about how you got your path from college to Broadway. We talked a little bit in our last video about your college experience, but once you graduated and you got that ridiculously expensive piece of paper, how did you use that to get to where you are today?
Well, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the phrase, it's who you know, in the theater. You'll probably hear that constantly, right? And I'll give you a little brief idea of what that means in terms of how it made, how I started my career. I went to my college lobby, like theater lobby, where the professor's offices were, and I looked at Art Search, because back in the day, you couldn't look at anything up online, right? You would go and you'd get like the paper Art Search and you'd look. And I applied for internships, and I got an internship at the Porthouse Theater Company in Ohio. It's affiliated with Kent State University. And I walked into my first experience with working with an equity company. I was an intern. I was not an equity member, but I worked with an equity stage manager for the first time. And I proceeded to sort of follow him around for the next couple of years. When I graduated from school the next year, he had me come and do props at the Contemporary American Theater Festival in West Virginia. And then I followed him and became a production assistant at the Cleveland Playhouse for a year. But at the end of that year, I wanted to be back in New York. And I had started a little bit by working at Playwrights Horizons in reception. I would answer the phone as a receptionist in New York, or I would help with concessions during a show. And I met an equity stage manager there, Janet Takami, who I said to her, I'm a stage manager. I want to be a stage manager. I'm starting out. And she said to me, well, there's something called the Director's Lab at Lincoln Center Theater. You should send your resume there. Right. And so I didn't know her. She didn't know me. She just took my word for it that I wanted to be a stage manager and gave me an idea of where to send my resume. And this is the days so I faxed it over to Lincoln Center. And they were hiring for something they called the Director's Lab. And the production manager, production coordinator that they hired to oversee the Director's Lab, looked at my resume when they were looking for someone last minute. They needed to hire a production assistant last minute. Looked at my resume, and Josh Friedman, who was the equity stage manager that I had followed around for 2 years, was on the list on my resume. And she had worked with Josh in Ohio and said, well, I need somebody quick, and this person at least has a reference from someone I know, so I'll call her. And I got my first job in New York for the Lincoln Center Theater Directors Lab from that connection. I didn't even know about the Director's Lab if I hadn't met Janet, and then I got the job because I had Josh's name on my resume. So, and that Lincoln Center Theater job led to the next summer doing the Director's Lab again and being a production assistant. And they were going to have a show come into their Mitzi Newhouse Theater, and it was a new dance play called Contact. Susan Stroman and John Weidman were creating it. And so there was a stage manager, Tom Woodman, who got my name from the production managers at Lincoln Center because I had done the director's lab for 2 summers. And he asked me to interview for a PA position. And I remember to this day that there was something happened and the equity stage manager was not very happy with the director, and the director decided to stagger lunch breaks for the actors but keep working. And I basically ended up having to run part of the rehearsal. And so I ended up, instead of having a lunch break, because I wasn't an equity member, I didn't get my lunch break for the day. And I was supposed to interview with Tom on my lunch break. So I ended up having to come to him and say, I'm so sorry, I actually am on the 10-minute break. I have to be back in rehearsal. And I remember walking away from that interview thinking that would have been really neat to get that job, but now I'm not going to get it because I had to make the rehearsal so short. And but I got the job. I got offered the job, one of 2 production assistants, and we started the show Contact. It was August of 1999, and we did the show in the Mitzi Newhouse Theater. I was supposed to only be on contract until opening night, but they asked me to continue as a sort of long-run PA on the show through January, and then they moved us to the Vivian Beaumont Theater, and we became a Broadway show. And again, I was only supposed to be there until opening night. And then the day before opening night and the last day on contract, they asked me to stay as a long-run PA. So basically, I was still a production assistant. I wasn't on an equity contract, but I was the 4th member of the stage management team. And I stayed for the entire run of Contact, and that show closed in September of 2002. So all told, it was 3 years and my first Broadway show, but I was not on an equity contract and did not become an equity stage manager until the end of that run. So now I was a newly minted equity stage manager, but I had been on a Broadway show for 3 years, basically, at that point. And I was lucky enough to then be able to sort of continue my career. In fact, Lincoln Center Theater really gave me my start because they turned around and asked me to come back and be the 2nd assistant for a show called Dinner at 8. And on that show, I met Karen Armstrong and Adam Hunter. Adam John Hunter is his equity name. And I then, for the next basically 15 years, worked either for Lincoln Center, that they would call me, or I would follow Adam around for the next number of years. And really can trace my entire career back to that beginning.
That's awesome. What was your first production stage management gig? As a Broadway production stage manager?
So I like to say that I'm actually a career ASM. I actually prefer being an ASM first, but I like being a PSM. I'm happy to do it, but my joy is being the first. And so I really happily followed Adam around for the rest of my career. We did a show called, so my first PSM gig really was, we did a show called A Catered Affair. And we were doing our out-of-town tryout at the Old Globe in San Diego. But at the same time, Adam was working with John Doyle to direct the national tour of Sweeney Todd. Yes, that's what was happening. So I'm like trying to remember all of the stuff. So Adam and John had to be in the Sweeney Todd rehearsal, and then John Doyle had to be in the Catered Affair rehearsals directing. So I was PSMing the out-of-town tryout for A Catered Affair while Adam directed the national tour of Sweeney Todd, but at the same time knowing that Adam would come in as the PSM of A Catered Affair when we moved to Broadway. That was always the plan. I was PSMing in my role as Adam's first. But that was my first official PSM position. And then a year later, I was asked to be the PSM of Rock of Ages when it started off Broadway at New World Stages. And did that show. We moved to Broadway, we moved to the Brooks Atkinson Theater, and I stayed with that show until it closed the Brooks Atkinson Theater in 2011. And then, again, I did a show with Adam. I was the ASM at Classic Stage Company with John Doyle. We did Passion in 2013. And Adam had to leave the production just a few weeks before we were going to close. So I took over as the PSM for the end of that run. And I was the PSM for at the Alley Theater in 2012 for a production of Death of a Salesman. And that's really the extent of my PSM experience. Every other show I've done is a first or a second.
That's such a good point to talk about, that ASM really isn't an assistant to the stage manager. It's a completely different skill set, and it's not something that people necessarily even want to move up through the ranks to production stage manager, and that's totally valid. And you can have a wonderful career just doing ASM gigs.
Yeah, and after PSMing Rock of Ages, which I love doing, and I loved being able to tech the show and the call of the show. Really, I actually had to convince a few people when I then went to go for ASM gigs, and they were like, "What are you doing? You know, like, are you really interested in this ASM gig when you've been a PSM?" And I said, "No, absolutely. Like, this is what I want. This is what I do. I have no problem with PSMing, but this is where my really my skill set and my passion lies, in being an ASM."
It's such a, when you're like, if you view it as rising through the ranks, it doesn't really, being an ASM doesn't even really prepare you for being a PSM. Like, they're completely different skill sets. At least on Broadway, you get to switch around and call the show. But if you're at a regional theater where you don't switch, you could be an ASM for years and never call a show until something bad happens and now you're in charge.
Yes, that is true. I will say that I very much like being the ASM on Broadway, because I get to do the full experience as a stage manager. I get to do every part of the job. I'm not sure that I would want to go years and years without calling a show, but that is the benefit of working mostly in Broadway. Yeah.
So in the 27 years since you've started being a stage manager, how has this industry changed, ignoring the great pause that we are currently in and any changes? We don't need to speculate about what might happen until it actually happens later, but not considering what might happen because of the coronavirus or anything. How has the industry changed in these 27 years? And how would that change your approach if you had to enter the industry today, or I guess in January of this year, as opposed to when you actually did enter this industry?
So I'm going to look at it from a point of view as that when I went to start teaching for the first time, I asked that question to a bunch of my friends and colleagues. What do you look for when you're hiring a production assistant? What do you look for when you're hiring an ASM? I asked general managers, what are you looking for when you're hiring a PSM, right? Tried to get some other like perspectives on what they were looking for. And I was fascinated to find that there was a little bit of a generational divide in terms of stage managers. What I was always told when I first started out, and what I then sort of absorbed and definitely put into play, was that I wasn't necessarily looking for someone with the craft skills. As an equity ASM, I expect someone to be a professional stage manager already, right? Especially on a Broadway show, an equity ASM could have more experience than the PSM, right? It is not an entry level position. So let me back up again. I really am talking about PAs. I'm really talking about entry level positions. So entry level positions, I have always looked for somebody who had a good attitude and had some instincts to be a good stage manager and could pay attention and could be ready to work. But I wasn't so worried about what their craft skill set was, because I know what I like my paperwork to be and what questions I have to ask in order to put paperwork together. And I might ask the PA to go on the computer while I'm in rehearsal and put the template together, but I'm going to ask them to do what I need for my work, right? And if I need a PA to do stage management, things like track props and things like that, then depending on their skill set, I may give them the information. Like, I may ask them to do it in a way that I need to be able to put it together as the first. I'm not sure that made any sense. But really what I'm looking for is the attitude and the instincts. But when I talk to some of the stage managers I know who were just a bit younger than I am, what I found was that they were interested in the craft skills that the person came in with. And so I'll call out actually a wonderful stage manager, amazing stage manager named Christine DeMoore. Christine and I met in 2013 when I was hiring PAs for Adam and I for a bed and a chair at New York City Center Encores. And she's an amazing equity stage manager. She went through a BFA program. She's just a bit younger than I am. And she said to me, I want to know their skill set. I want to know that they have the craft skills. And then I talked to other people also. And that really stood out to me, is that she went through a BFA program and then she came in saying, okay, so and that's what I'm looking for when people come into the market. I'm looking for their skill set and then to have the craft skills to be able to come into a team. And I went through a general theater program and I'm really, most of my job as a stage manager and an equity stage manager was on the job training. Most of my training was on the job training. And I think that that's a divide, a generational divide. So if the older the stage manager is that's hiring you as PA, they might be more willing to, this is a generalization obviously, but they might be more looking to teach you the craft on the job, where the younger stage managers who went through more specialized training in college might be looking for you to be able to show your craft skills.
That's such a neat observation to think about. And I wonder if you were to do like a survey, even people that are younger but did not go through a BFA in stage management, if it's people who fell into it like me, if I was, whenever I'm in the position to hire people, would I look for people that have the craft skills? Or I don't know what I would look for yet, because I have not been in the position to hire anyone. Considering all of that, would you say that there is a single secret to success? Is there one thing that you can do to make sure that you're going to be successful in this industry, pandemics aside?
Yeah, I know this sounds like a cop-out, but be a good person. Like, really, I'm going to tell you that I got jobs because people were like, yeah, she's good to have around, has good energy, right? Not really. I don't know that I ever got a job because of my craft skills, right? And as an equity stage manager working on Broadway, I certainly had to have the craft skills. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to be part of a team, so I'm going to have some things I'm good at and some things I'm not as good at. And then the rest of the team will be able to, balance out my skill set. But really, I got the job because somebody said, I want to work with them. And in fact, I can be even more specific. When I was just out of college, I was a PA for a reading in New York City. And it was a workshop reading for Anna Devere Smith for a show called House Arrest, first edition. And they were doing a reading in New York for 2 weeks, and then they were going to Arena Stage in DC. And they had full year stage management interns in DC, but somehow they asked if I could go along. And I think it was the production manager and the artistic director, I met with them. And basically what I was told is the production manager came to me at one point and said, they asked if you could come along, and they gave me an apartment to live in and gave me a stipend to work on the show. Wow. And I got to be in a housing just like the actors did, even though I wasn't an equity member. And the production manager one time said to me that when they asked to bring you along, I realized that every time I saw you in rehearsal in New York, you were smiling. And so we decided that you had a good attitude, and why not bring somebody along who was always smiling, right? And then I'm going to tell you that I know the moment that I blew it with that production manager. A number of months, like weeks into the production at Arena Stage when we were there in DC, and I was frustrated by something, and I was just cranky that day, and I was sitting on the stage, and somebody had put a like spike mark down, and the spike mark was big and like just really big and really obnoxious, and I was like grumbling out loud to myself, like, this is just ugly. Like, there's no reason for this. There's no reason to be that big. I'm making it smaller. But I was cranky, and I was grumbling out loud in the middle of the theater, and the production manager walked by, and I was like, oh shit, I just lost like that job. Like, not there was a job for me, but I just lost that impression that he had of me, of somebody who was just somebody good to work with.
But I think there's also, you can mess up one connection, and that's not going to hurt your career in the long run. It might hurt it in the short term, but you can spring back.
Yes, no, absolutely. And to be perfectly honest, what I didn't do then that I know now is what I learned over the years is that I probably should have gone and said, you know what, I was just being really cranky out loud in the middle of the stage, and that's not professional. I shouldn't have done that. Like, I should have acknowledged that, and that probably would have repaired the his impression of me, right? So it's the secret to success is really just being somebody that people want to work with.
That's such a good, it ties in everything that you ever really learn about this industry. It's all who you know, and it's, if I can call someone that you've worked with before, because I know them too, they need to be able to give you a positive review in order to get hired. That's important to think about.
And I've made mistakes. That wasn't the only mistake I ever made. I've made mistakes later on in my career that I know that there are people that I worked with who would maybe say, I don't know that she's the best person to work with. And not many, but I've certainly had my moments. But overall, I've been able to be aware of what I was putting out into the world. And if I was anxious or cranky or frustrated, I tried to not make it other people's problem.
Yeah, I keep hearing during all of these panels and just groups or discussion groups or whatever, there's a bunch of people that are like, it's not your job to make sure that everyone's your friend, but I think it is your job to make sure everyone is okay with working with you. You know, I think there's a huge difference. And if they can't separate the two, that's not on you. But
yeah, you don't have to be friends with everyone, but you have to be a good colleague.
But we kind of already talked about this with the generational difference. But what makes someone marketable for entry-level positions are there specific craft skills? I keep hearing for Broadway PAs, it's all not stage right. What is it? Final draft is what they look for in terms of craft skills.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, ultimately, you just have to be a good person and good to work with. But yes, you have to have the craft skills and the experience. Most of the time, there's not a lot of time to teach someone along the way. It's really, they have to walk in knowing things. So being able to not just know like final draft software, but know how to support a playwright while they're doing script changes in a rehearsal setting is a key skill set if you are going into that environment. So really, I guess the answer to this question is having the right skill set for what you're going into, right? I think that when I'm teaching, I think that absolutely my students should learn how to call a show, right? But when they're starting out in this business as a production assistant, is their ability to call a show the most important craft skill that they can have? Absolutely not, right? They may not be calling a show for a couple of years as they get into their career. So it's really about having a good overall skill set, being able to be very aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. It is okay to not be good at everything. You have to be competent at everything that a stage manager needs to do. And what I mean, and I mean stage manager, I mean anyone on the stage management team. You have to be competent at the craft skills of being a stage manager. But you don't have to be the best at every single thing, because that's what teams are for, is to be able to have that balance of skill sets. And if you know yourself and you don't pretend to be good at everything or pretend to be bad at everything, if you know yourself and you can be confident in your abilities, you can be a good teammate. And so that's really what it is being aware. And if you're not good at something, not just being like, well, I'm not good at that. Keep trying, keep making yourself, keep working on that skill set, but also have the ability to say it's okay not to be the best at everything.
And it's also a wonderful way to advocate for the need to have teams, because no one can put you the best at everything. You need people to fall back on.
Yeah, I will tell you honestly that I did not realize how lucky I was and how privileged I was in my career until I found out that there are equity stage managers out there in the rest of the country who are actually the only stage manager in the room. And I honestly don't know wouldn't know how to deal with that. Like, there, even for 29-hour readings I've had in ASM, like, there is so much to do. Right. There's so much to do in our job that it takes more than one person.
And then you get into like cruise ships where you're the stage manager and the company manager, and then you're still the only person on the team. And then it gets into, you just have to start prioritizing what actually has to get done and what's, I guess, going to have to not get done, because there's only so many hours in the day.
There you go. So that, I think that goes along with being aware of where your place on the team and what you bring to a team, and being aware of your skills and your strengths and weaknesses. It's also being aware of where to draw the line. Even though there's not a specific job description, as an equity stage manager or a Broadway stage manager, there is a tradition of what I think that stage managers cover or stage managers deal with in the process, right? But that's with the idea of having a team of 3 equity stage managers and probably at least 2 production assistants, right? And if I don't have that team, I may not be able to do everything that I consider that I would do for a Broadway show. So definitely, I think for me, working on fully fleshed out teams that have enough people to do everything has made me really be aware of what I can offer if it's only me, or if it's only me and one other ASM or a production assistant or something. There's so many, especially in the non-equity world. As people are first starting out, if they want to do anything in the non-equity world, it's being by yourself on a team is so, unfortunately, so very common. And if there is someone else, it's a swing that comes in when you're not there. Yeah, teams are important. If you're a producer watching this, hire some more stage managers. And I think this is everybody in the theater, right? Like, in the theater world. If you're a director, you have to know how to direct for that production. And it may not be the production you want to direct it eventually, but if you only have a certain amount of rehearsals, you can only do what you can do in that rehearsal time, right? And you have to acknowledge and be aware of how much time you have. If you're a designer, you can design, if you try to design the $20 million musical, but you're doing the $2 million musical, that there's going to be a problem, right? So design for the show that you're doing, direct for the show you're doing, stage manage for the show that you're doing. You can only do what you can do with the resources you have.
That's a great way to look at it for literally anyone in this entire industry. It's so succinct. What are some tips and ways that people can tailor their path if they know, like, coming out of college, I want to do Broadway, or coming out of college, I want to be someone that travels around the country doing regional theaters, or I want to do national tours? If they know exactly what they want to do, what's something that they can do to tailor their path to what they want to do?
So it's about, if you know what you want to do, go get yourself in the room to do it. get yourself the connections. If you know you want to tour, start meeting stage managers who tour, start sending your resume to the employers who are sending out the tours, right? If you know you want to go to New York, go to New York. If you know you want to, wherever you know, go get yourself in the room and be working with the people that you want their jobs in 10 years, right? Do it. But at the same time, if you don't know what you want to do, or even if you do know what you want to do, you also want to be open to the opportunities that come your way. Don't turn down an opportunity because you're so hyper-focused on where you want to go. But also be aware of, is that opportunity going to take you where you want to go? So if you are, because I'm from a New York background, if you want to go to New York and you know you want to be there, go there. The work is there. You need to start meeting people, go there. But for instance, even though I'm from New York, I wasn't particularly stuck on being in New York when I first started out. And like I said, my first gig as a production assistant, I got because I had that experience in Ohio, right? Because I had met someone at a summer theater in Ohio, and then I had gone to the Cleveland Playhouse for a year. And because I had that experience, that's how I got that connection in New York. So it's not like, you don't want to close yourself off to the opportunities that come your way, but you don't have to say yes to everything. I actually got, speaking of, I've said, like, I prefer being an ASM over a PSM, even though I'm okay PSMing, right? You can still hire me. I'm okay PSMing. No, but one time I actually got offered a job to do a tour, and the actress, the lead actress on the tour was Kim Fields, who played Tootie on The Facts of Life, for those of us of a certain age. And I actually had to talk to her, Kim Fields, because she actually got say in who the PSM was, who was hiring. But I was 22, maybe 23, right? And it was going to take me out of New York. I think that was when I had moved back to New York. And it was going to take me on tour. And I wasn't sure that it was going to take me where I wanted to go, right? At that point, and I talked to my mom about it, and I said, like, and of course my mother was like, she had no background in this world, right, whatsoever. And my dad was a firefighter, and my mom was is a retired nurse. So like, this was a whole new world to her. But basically she said, take it if it works for you. But if you're feeling like it's not going to take you where you want to go, something else will come along. It feels like at this point, you know that something else will come along, so just wait for the next thing. And I did. I turned it down. But that was scary, and I remember it to this day, right? 22 years ago, however long it was, that the idea of turning something down when you don't have something else coming along is scary, but sometimes that's what you need to do. While at the same time, don't ignore opportunities that come your way just because, right? Like, you have to be able to balance it.
Specifically talking about Broadway, it seems like it's just this club where you have to have worked on Broadway to work on Broadway. It reminds me of that package of scissors that tells you that you need scissors to open the package of scissors. But if I had scissors, I would have opened the package already.
Yes.
How do you get out of that paradox? You know, that constant.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer to that. The answer is that's how we use production assistants. And again, I will come from a background of in a Broadway situation where I have never been in a situation where the production assistants were expected to be stage managers. Except that I was on a 3-year run of a Broadway show as a production assistant. So let me back that up. At least in rehearsal process, I've always worked for a full team, and the production assistants, while they were stage managers and we were having them do things on the stage management team, it was like things that to back up the rest of the stage managers. So that they were fully staffed stage management teams, and the production assistants contributed to the team as a whole, instead of taking a job of an equity stage manager. I should say that. The production assistants that I worked with did not take the job of an equity stage manager. But so that is the way to get into the room and to get to know the Broadway process, and then to leave an opening night and to be able to maybe get your next gig and your next gig, right? And that is still the way. And that is why this is very controversial, but you will hear of equity stage managers taking production assistant jobs on Broadway. It's because it's those stage managers who want to break into the Broadway world, but have already taken their equity card on somewhere else or in a different show, but still need to be able to break into that Broadway world. And so they take that PA position. Now, there's also been stage managers who come into Broadway as a PSM because they are coming with the show or they're coming with the director. But that's it's much less common, because ultimately, if stage managing in any situation is a skill that you have to have specific language and specific knowledge of the theater. And then when you become an equity member, you have to have specific knowledge of equity in order to be a stage manager. Well, on Broadway, you have to have knowledge of all of the other theatrical unions, right? You have to have the knowledge of how it works on Broadway, which is different in some ways because you are working with many other unions. Because everybody, I will say this, and this isn't not a dig at other companies or other areas of theater, but when I've worked off Broadway, when I've worked in regional theaters and stuff like that, I have worked more with more people in the room that were non-union or starting out their careers. When I'm working on Broadway, everybody in the room is at the top of their career, right? When you're working with the crew, you're not working with when I did an out-of-town Broadway tryout for Little Shop of Horrors, we worked with crew who that was their secondary job. They had a real job somewhere else. When I'm working on Broadway, that's their real job. The crew I'm working with, they are experts in their field, and that's their real job, right? And so being able to know the traditions, being able to know how to deal with all of the different intricacies of how the other theatrical unions work and how you have to accommodate for those rules, knowing how to put in these big, huge shows with a lot of automation into these 19th century and early 20th century theaters that are not built for the kind of theater we do these days. There's a lot of specialized knowledge, and it's a multi-million-dollar company. As a stage manager, we are middle management, definitely, but we are still, the stage manager team is in the room, in the rehearsal room or in the theater, and we have a responsibility to a multi-million-dollar company, right? The stakes are high. And so the general managers, the producers are going to be wanting to make sure the stage management team they're hiring has that skill set, has that knowledge. Even when there are situations where an equity stage manager with a lot of experience is on a show in a different venue, off Broadway or in regional theater, they won't necessarily get hired as the PSM when it moves to Broadway, right? It depends on the show. It depends on the experience of the person. It depends on the producers and the general manager. But there's been plenty of times where someone who is the equity stage manager on a show that then moves to Broadway, if they don't have the Broadway background, that somebody else is hired as the PSM in order to be able to deal with the Broadway stuff you need to know, right? But there have been other PSMs who have come in because they know the show, because they know the director. But then, quite frankly, the first that they hire is going to be a Broadway first with a lot of experience, right? Because again, you need somebody on the team who has that experience. So I don't have a good answer other than your job is to get yourself that experience. And so, yes, we still work in a field where on-the-job training is the most important part. And in order to get the on-the-job training, you have to get the job, but you can't get the job until you get the on-the-job training. I wish that I wonder if these questions we're asking ourselves these days about, instead of just saying, yeah, it's tough, but this is the way the theater is. I feel like now as theater artists, we're saying, no, wait a second. There's no, this is the way it is. Let's figure out how to make this work. Let's figure out how to get access to people. So I think what the next step for me, I think that maybe our union, Actors Equity Association, maybe we have to have a better plan for apprenticing, of how you can apprentice. And because we are, and especially for stage managers, because we are, it is different than actors, right? You don't have to have Broadway experience to get cast as an actor on Broadway. You do have to have Broadway experience to get hired as a stage manager.
But then that begs the question, what about the exact opposite kind of person, right? What if they don't know, you know, I would love to work on Broadway, but for me, I'm just as happy doing cruise ships or theme parks or like all of the kinds of things. For people that don't know where they want to land, what are some things that they can do so they're not getting like pigeonholed as just a cruise ship stage manager or just a theme park stage manager? Or not that I would consider it pigeonholing someone to say that they're just a Broadway stage manager, because you could pretty much do whatever you want after that.
The answer is we do get pigeonholed in this business. And a Broadway stage manager or a Broadway first or a Broadway, like there's, you do get pigeonholed. You get pigeonholed, a Broadway stage manager who does musicals versus a Broadway stage manager who does plays. I have only done one straight play on Broadway and only done 2 straight plays total my entire career, right?
Wow.
Because the people who were calling me to hire me were calling me for musicals. Like I don't, but I think the only way in some ways you are going to get pigeonholed, because pigeonholing is actually about, because you are developing expertise in a very specific place within the theater community. So it's not all bad, but at the same time, especially when you're starting out, the more you can broaden your experiences, the better. So if you want to be in one place, you sort of want to go there and specialize, but also make sure you think about keeping your experience broad. If you're not sure where you want to go, then I think in a way that's what you've been doing, Kent, which is you take the opportunities that come, right? Mm-hmm. And but at some point, in order to go from that journeyman status into that mastery, like to specialize in your field, you're going to specialize even more so within the field, and it will feel like pigeonholing, but maybe it's more about specializing.
That's the reframing is really a nice way to think about it, especially it's pigeonholing versus specializing. I like that a lot. I'm going to remember that. Thank you. All right. So I guess the next question that I have for you, and really one of the biggest questions I'm sure a lot of people have, is they might have a lot of kind of fears and anxieties that they're going to mess up and just completely ruin their career, which also is false, right? One mess up is not going to ruin your career. But I feel like a lot of the ways that people fear that they're going to mess up might not even be the ways that they do mess up. Because if you're constantly thinking about it, you're probably going to do that thing right. So you've been in the position to see a lot of people start their careers and not finish their careers, hopefully, but to start a lot of careers. And what are some of the biggest avoidable like pitfalls and mistakes that you see people making that they might not think are the mistakes that they're going to be making?
So one of the first ones, it's going to sound kind of facetious, but they can smell the fear. Like the more nervous you are, the more you're not confident in your abilities, the more you're like uptight or anxious or fearful about that beginning of your career. You're gonna put off an energy that is not calming, that is not conducive to collaboration, and people are going to get put off by that desperation. So the truth is, one of the things that you can do for yourself starting out is to just be okay with what it's going to take to get to the point where your career picks up, and not be thinking 5 steps ahead in terms of I have to get this job, or I have to do this well, or I have to make people like I have to impress people that I'm with right now. Like, the more you can just be calm and cool and collected, people want to hang out with the person that's just cool. Like, and if you have to fake it till you make it, fake it till you make it. Like, but if you come in the room feeling that anxiety and feeling that desperation and feeling like this has to be right, it's going to put everybody off. And then the other thing that we've talked about before, which is be able to make a mistake and correct it. Be able to not have a mistake be the end of your career. And you're the one who's going to make that happen, right? And I'll tell you, I've made so many mistakes over the course of my career, but I've also done some good things. And what I learned over the course of my career was to be honest when I screw something up, right? That's totally like, that was me. Let me fix that. Or, hey, I think I just made something worse instead of better. Or, hey, I think I said something in a way that I'm going to back up and repair this because I said it the wrong way. And one of the things I remember is that my very first show as a college freshman, September, October of my first year, when I had figured out I wanted to be a stage manager, and I had been asked to ASM. No, I hadn't been asked to ASM. I had just been asked to come on as a crew member for a student production. And so I was there for a tech rehearsal and then the performance. I wasn't in rehearsal, didn't get to know the show. And there was no such thing as run sheets or anything. We didn't know enough at the time to go do that. And I was supposed to set a prop. And it was very specific. The playwright was the director, a student playwright, student director. And it was very specific that they were supposed to have a fight with poster tubes. And I didn't set the poster tubes. And so the actors on stage had to improv, and they had a pillow fight instead. But I didn't set the poster tubes. And when I realized it, I didn't do this with any sort of knowledge, but I made a big deal. I crumbled on myself backstage, and I was like, that was me. I did that. I forgot. I made a big deal out of the fact that I made a mistake, because I felt this urge. I guess I felt the right urge that I should own up to it. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to acknowledge that this was the end of the world. I needed to acknowledge that this was so bad that they would know that I was a good person and I could continue. I understood the stakes of things. And instead, of course, I made a fool out of myself. I was ridiculous for making such a big production, silently, but making such a big production that I had made a mistake, right? And so what I learned from the time I was 18 to now at 45, I learned that if I make a mistake, just to own up to it, but also be aware of the severity. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. It's not, right? It is a job that I want to do my best at, but sometimes I'm going to screw it up, and I have to just be able to be okay with that and keep going.
The fear of making a mistake being the biggest mistake is so interesting to think about, and such an interesting way to kind of flip it on its own head. Yeah. And it's so neat that everyone describes, being the best stage manager as being cool, calm, and collected. And yet the kind of stereotype of the stage manager is someone that's stressed out with a clipboard in the corner, pulling their own hair out. And not to say that you don't get stressed out sometimes, when things happen,
Right. But at the end, you have to remember that it's not the end of the world. You have to be able to handle the stress, right? We talk a lot in class about the stereotype of the angry, screaming high school stage manager, right? And one of the biggest things that the first year stage managers learn over the course of the year there at UCF is that doesn't, you don't have to fall into that trap. That you can, and that the more you put organization and plans in place, and the more well-staffed your production is, and you plan ahead and know what can be done and what you have to let go of and say it can't be done, like then you won't have to be that angry, stressed. Yeah.
One of the great things that I feel like has been such a silver lining, at least for me, of this great pause is realizing how these little things that used to stress me out, like, oh, the prop didn't get reset exactly right. We can still work with it. It's not the end of the world, right? I'm not making decisions that if I do something wrong, a pandemic's going to happen. Like there's nothing, I'm not saving lives. I mean, the trap of thinking that the stakes are so high is kind of being removed.
Yeah, you have to be aware of the stakes and that they are high stakes, and be able to approach things with the correct amount of gravity. But at the same time, a lot of us in the theater will always say, well, it's not brain surgery, right? Or it's not rocket science, or sometimes it's become, well, it's not rocket surgery. But at the end of the day, it's not life and death what we do. And then sometimes even but you have to know that it's life and death. So again, with a little bit of like grim humor, when we were doing Rock of Ages on Broadway, if you finished a show as a stage manager where you called a show or something and you didn't feel like totally right in the pocket the whole time and you were feeling a little off, sometimes we used to joke that, well, I didn't kill anybody today, right? And it's sort of a grim joke because there are Broadway shows that you're calling that you could kill someone if you didn't call a good show, right? So, but that show, it was a low enough tech show that there wasn't actually that kind of gravity in our hands in terms of calling. And so having that balance, like anything, having the balance of take it seriously enough, but not so seriously that any variation will ruin your life.
Well, I think this has been so wonderful. Is there anything else that you'd like to add for those that are starting their journeys? I think we've covered so much thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me and the audience as well.
Yeah, I think that the take it seriously, but not too seriously. Be confident in yourself, but allow yourself to fail. Be willing to learn, but at the same time, make sure you pursue knowledge so that you have it. Really the key to being a successful stage manager is to pay attention and be okay with what happens. Yeah.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a wonderful 2 videos, and I'm sure I'll reach out to you for a few more later as I come across them. But thank you again. For those of you watching, thank you so much for watching. My name is Kent, and this has been your half-hour call. Do you have a question or an idea for a video? If you do, send me an email at askhalfhourcall@gmail.com. That's askhalfhourcall@gmail.com.